Albert is working at INRA in Avignon. He took the train yesterday to give this talk. Thank you very much for being with us and to share your very large experience in evapotranspiration and all these related matters. You have the floor.
So it's working. So I'm not used to have many students like that. Usually when I have courses like 15 or 10, sometimes 3. In the university we have in Avignon, they are not very interested in this type of topic. So, and last year they canceled. There was only one student who wanted to come. Okay. Pierre said I have the last talk, and it's going to be the more, I don't remember, the more complex or dense. Okay, I don't know, but we will see. I tried not to put equations. So there are some, but they are for elementary school, so it's going to be okay. I don't know how long I'm going to be, so when you're really tired, you say stop. Okay, so I'm going to start. So the title was Water Stress Detection, Evapotranspiration Indicator, and Irrigation Management. Actually, I'm going to talk almost only on evapotranspiration. Maybe one word on water stress. But evapotranspiration was already a lot of things to explain, so just evapotranspiration. Okay, evapotranspiration, we call it ET. For people who are not aware, ET is very simple to remember, so we prefer to use ET most of the time. But I try to say evapotranspiration when talking, but sometimes it's just coming ET. I'm going to give you an introduction, of course, talk about the energy balance, some of the evapotranspiration concepts that I'm going to explain, and one concept, okay, it's not the right direction. One concept which is very important is the reference evapotranspiration. After that, I'm going to talk of remote sensing of evapotranspiration and different methods. Okay. Evapotranspiration is a combination of processes where we have a water change. The water is changing phases from liquid to vapor. And also the vapor is released to the atmosphere. It is a combination of several processes. One is evaporation, which is involving the water surfaces and the soil, and which is related only to physical interactions or physical processes. The other main part of evapotranspiration is transpiration, so which is involving the plant or other living organism, because you are transpiring maybe today a lot, I don't know. And this is related to physical processes, almost the same as evaporation, and also physiological mechanisms. So here we have a plant with, from the root to the leaf, and there are the main processes involved in transpiration. So first, you have the root development and the absorption of water from the soil. There are different types of processes. A lot of the water is absorbed using, based on a passive mechanism, but also there are some molecules or some systems that use enzyme in order to transfer the water from the soil to the roots. The water is transferred through the plant using the xylem, which is some kind of channel for water in the plant. And the water is going to the leaf, where it is stored in the cells, and released to the atmosphere through the stomata, which are some specific apparatus at the leaf surface, which are going to regulate the transfer of water. So I suppose most of you know that already. And if I say something wrong, tell me. Evapotranspiration has a lot of functions. So one of the main functions is to maintain the thermal equilibrium of plants. When you have transpiration, you have a consumption of energy, and the temperature of plants is decreasing. If the temperature is too large, most of the physiological processes can stop, and the plants are in trouble. This year in the south of France, we get a lot of dead leaf because of the heat wave, and the temperature was too high to sustain the process in the leaf. And many farmers, in particular for vineyards, they lost a part of their crops because of that. Transpiration has also the function to transport nutrients from the soil. So the water extracted in the soil is transporting a lot of the nutrients. It has a function to maintain the plant turgor, which means that the water is stored in part of the leaf or in the stem, or that helps the plant to have its architecture. And also, transpiration maintains the possibility to have water for the physiological and the biochemical processes. But this is not a lot of water which is involved in these processes. Even if you have a lot of water in plants, let's say more than 90%, most of the water going through the plants is released to the atmosphere. So something which is very important with transpiration is that it is very closely related to photosynthesis and plant productivity. So I was talking about the stomata, and so water vapor is going out of the plant through the stomata, but the CO2 which is used for photosynthesis is coming in the plant through the same stomata. So because of that, there is a close link between the stomatal function and photosynthesis, so at the physiological level. And this has also an implication at a larger level, I mean, over a long time, or the wool plant, that there is a stability of the ratio between dry matter production and quantity of used water, usually. It's what we call water use efficiency. So this is some example of this, the relation between photosynthesis or production and transpiration. So on the left, you have something at the leaf level. So you have here the stomatal conductance, which is a representation of the behavior of stomata. So when it increases, it means the stomata are more open and the water is going out more easily, and the CO2 is coming in more easily. And here you have something related to photosynthesis with some kind of normalization in terms of the moisture at the leaf surface and the concentration of CO2 at the leaf surface. And when you do a relation between the stomatal conductance and this index, which is actually very close to photosynthesis, you get, in most cases, you get that type of relation, so a linear relation, showing that at the physiological level, there are mechanisms that really make the interaction between photosynthesis and stomata behavior, and then transpiration. Here on the right, you have something about the water use efficiency, and you have the water use, so it's in kilogram per can. So can is because the plants were grown in some pot, and they were using this unit for this study. So this is the water use, and this is the yield at the end. The yield being here the biomass production. So you have three types of plants. So I'm going to start in the middle. So it's a C3 plants, wheat, which has a certain type of photosynthesis system. So you have this relation. Here you have sorghum, which is a C4 plant, in which the photosynthetic behavior is a little bit different from the C3, in the terms that they have a specific system to avoid losing CO2 during photosynthesis. In C3 plant, part of the CO2 which is taken by photosynthesis is released back to the atmosphere. In C4 plant, it is not the case. The CO2 is coming back to photosynthesis and the production. So it is more efficient. So for the same level of water use, you have a better production. Here you have a leguminous crop, so it's alfalfa. And alfalfa has a lower water use efficiency because it's also using energy to extract nitrogen from the air by means of the symbiotic bacteria. And this uses energy, and the production, the crop production is decreased at the same level of water. So this type of curve is something you retrieve everywhere. And sometimes if you want a model to have evapotranspiration or evapotranspiration at a yearly level, annual level, maybe just having the production is going to give you a good estimate of evapotranspiration or water use. So this is the slide on water stress. I think the only one. So I have a definition of water stress is just when a plant process is limited by the reduction of water availability. And here on this graph, you have, so it's one example, or one schematic example. So you have the soil water content and the availability of, which is available to the root. And here you have a water stress in this, which means that okay, each one means that there is no impact, and when it starts decreasing, means that there is water stress appearing and increasing. The only thing I wanted to say here is that the different processes in the plant are not going to be sensitive to water stress at the same level. So the main the processes which are first, so when water is used by the plant, the soil water is going to decrease, so it's going to go from the right to the left. And the first processes that are going to be affected is the growth of the plant and the leaf growth. In particular, when so the soil water is decreasing, evapotranspiration at one moment, the plants are going to sense the decrease of availability of water, and the process of enlarging cells will decrease. If you look at the production, or here is the transpiration, but the production or photosynthesis is at the same level, you will see that this occurs later, which means that the production of biomass is still at the optimal level when the growth of the plant has started to stop or to decrease. I'm not going to talk about senescence. Okay. Evapotranspiration or evaporation has a large impact on the energy balance of the Earth system, because evaporation is using a lot of energy. So there is a value here for the lambda, which is called the latent heat of vaporization. And in order to have evaporation, we need a lot of energy coming from different origins. Maybe the main origin is the solar radiation, but also radiation coming from the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is emitted radiation toward the Earth's surface. A part of the energy may come from heat, so sensible heat, which means that there is a transfer of heat from one place to another place. So when we say heat, it's just, you just think about the temperature of the air. If the temperature is higher, the heat is higher. And this is transferred by air movement from one place to another. Usually it's transferred from hot place to cold place. Here I say it's about conduction. Conduction is a transfer of heat in the ground. So, for example, at night, you will have a transfer from the ground to the surface. So this can be some source of energy for evapotranspiration. And also, the water by itself has an internal energy, which is providing energy to evaporation. But this part, solar radiation, is usually the largest, is always the largest part. So when we talk about evaporation and transpiration and the energetic problem, there are many other factors that are controlling evapotranspiration. So the energy balance, I will come back later on it. So the incident radiation, providing a lot of the energy, the temperature of the air, the vapor content of the air, the wind, the availability of water in the ground, and if there is plants, of course, the type of vegetation, which vegetative state they are, the stomatal processes, the density and the size of the vegetation has an impact, the soil structure and the way the roots can enter the soil has an impact or develop in the soil, and the CO2 concentration in the air has also an impact. So one of the main control is going from the incident radiation. So it's controlled by the availability of energy. The other main control is going to be the availability of water. So the availability of water is going to control evapotranspiration by modulating the impact of energy. And this is strongly related to the type of climate. So this is the two main factors. One is the solar radiation, one in the rain. So if you have solar radiation, you have the potential for evapotranspiration. If you have water, you have evapotranspiration. If you have solar radiation and you don't have water, you will have a lower evapotranspiration. Another part which is related to climate, and that can be important in some situations, is the thermodynamic status of the atmosphere and what we call the atmospheric turbulence. So this has an impact on the temperature and the distribution of temperature of the air, or the vapor content in the air, and also the impact of the wind. Now, if we have vegetation, when we talk about evapotranspiration, so all the factors which are related to vegetation are going to impact evapotranspiration. So all these factors are acting together. And if we want to compute evapotranspiration, you need to account of all of them. Just one word about the CO2 concentration in the air. At the moment, CO2 concentration in the air is increasing. I suppose everybody knows. And this has a large impact on the stomatal processes. When CO2 increases, the stomata tend to close, which means that the flux of CO2 within the lift is not changing so much. And at the same time, the flux of water vapor to the atmosphere is decreasing, which means that in an atmosphere with a higher concentration of CO2, there is a large chance that evapotranspiration can be decreasing. I talked before that solar radiation, temperature, and so on have a large impact on evapotranspiration. This has a reverse impact, and the impact which is which is known in detail. So in climate change, we have we can have a very strong increase in temperature depending on the area, and this has the impact of increasing evapotranspiration. But if we include the CO2 concentration problem in the analysis, maybe this impact is not so large. And maybe in some situations, even evapotranspiration can decrease in the future. But at the moment, this is not known in enough detail to include this in the modeling. I mean, all the models are not giving the same type of results. So it's a large uncertainty we have in evapotranspiration in the future because of that. Evaporation is going to increase, transpiration depends on the situation. Okay. This is the energy balance. So I say that evapotranspiration is strongly related to energy balance. Evapotranspiration is using a lot of energy. So the energy balance is this equation. So here you have evapotranspiration, ET, and lambda ET is what we call the latent heat flux. So it's a flux of water vapor from the surface to the atmosphere, usually. And it is a heat flux because the vapor brings, to have this vapor, we need a lot of energy. The other terms of this equation are going to be the net radiation, which is the radiative balance of the surface, which is doing the balance between the energy, radiative energy coming from the sun and the atmosphere, and the radiative energy leaving the surface because solar radiation is reflected, and also because the land surface is going to emit radiation. Here you have the sensible heat flux. This is related to the transfer of heat from the surface to the atmosphere, or the reverse. And when we say transfer of heat, in a way, it's a transfer of temperature. So usually from the hottest place to the cooler place, and in particular, during daytime, the surface is hotter than the atmosphere, and there is a transfer of energy by the air molecule from the surface to the atmosphere. Here you have G, which is the ground heat flux, is a transfer of heat by conduction in the ground. So when the surface is hot during daytime, you will have a transfer of energy by this conduction towards the below in the soil, because the soil, when you go in the depth of the soil, you have a lower temperature. And the last term here is the energy storage in plants, which can be the storage of heat by conduction, but also photosynthesis is in this term. These are all the variables that have an impact. So I didn't put any equation there. So I hope it's okay for you. It's more complex for me because I used with the equation. So there are all the variables that have an impact, all the factors that have an impact on each flux. So here's the latent heat flux. So you have all the meteorological data here. So I realize the radiation is missing, but it's not in the equation, sorry. So yeah, this is what we have in the equation to obtain this. The impact of air temperature and vapor pressure is very important because it is what we call the driving force for transpiration or evapotranspiration, because it is generating the VPD, the vapor pressure deficit, which is in a way the dryness of the air. When this dryness is high, the air has more capacity to take water vapor from the surface. So here you have some plus or minus. So plus means that when this is increasing, the latent heat flux, the usual calculation of latent heat flux is going to increase. When it's minus, it means that it is decreasing. Here you have the factors that are going to affect the stomatal conductance. So stomatal conductance is the expression of the regulation of stomata, so the opening of stomata and the possibility of water vapor to go out to the atmosphere. And this is controlled by a lot of variables, and all the physiological processes involved are not well known at the moment. But there is a strong link with the processes related to photosynthesis at the physiological level, and also linked to hormonal regulation that are produced in the root. For example, some hormones are produced in the root and can inform the stomata that water is going to miss. The net radiation, so this is one of the most important terms in the equation because it's bringing almost all the available energy for evapotranspiration. So it's related to solar radiation and atmospheric radiation, so which are incoming radiation to the surface, and mitigating by the albedo and the surface temperature. The sensible heat flux is related to air temperature and the surface temperature, which the difference between the two are providing the driving force for the transfer of heat. Wind speed and surface roughness have a large impact on the turbulence, and when the turbulence increases, the flux increases. It's the same thing for latent heat flux. Here, the grounded flux is related to the soil temperature gradient and the thermal conductivity of the soil. And this term, usually in most of the analysis, you drop this term because it's not very large compared to all the others. At the most, it can be like 5%. So 5%, considering all the uncertainties that you have in everything else, is not so much, so it is usually dropped or neglected. Okay. It's okay? Okay. If you have questions, you can ask me questions in the course of the talk. So I was talking about evapotranspiration, and now when you are involved in application, in agricultural application or climate application or whatever, you're going to find some different concepts of evapotranspiration. One which is very important, because it's very old, it's a potential evapotranspiration. And potential evapotranspiration, so I have a definition here, like the highest rate of ET that can occur for a given climate. Usually it's a theoretical calculation. Before, in the time, it was also something that was measured by looking at the evaporation of a specific type of water tank, for example. But this potential evapotranspiration can also be the same, with the same definition, but for a given type of plant. So a given type of plant in a given climate. This is a concept which may be interesting, but which is very fuzzy because you have, so I put dozens of different formulas are available. The last time I've seen some kind of synthesis on that, there was 120 different formulas to calculate this potential evapotranspiration. And when you look at all these formulas, the numbers you get can be like 1 to 3 times different. I mean, like you have several hundred of % differences between the different calculations. What is important in potential evapotranspiration is that if you use it everywhere in the world or with the same formula, you can do some comparison between climate, you can do comparison between type of plant, and so on. Now there is a new something, okay, I can say a new concept, but compared to potential evapotranspiration. Yes, it's a new concept. So it's what we call the reference evapotranspiration. It is very commonly used in agriculture, in particular for water requirement assessment. And in this case, it is some kind of potential evapotranspiration, but with a very specific definition. And usually it's a rate of ET for a reference surface with a full canopy cover and a full water availability. At the moment, in the world, there are 2 types of references. So the 2 main references, maybe the only 2, is either it's a full covering alfalfa crop. So it's a reference which is used in the United States. And it can also be a grass reference, which was promoted by FAO. Both of these references are used to compute reference evapotranspiration. Using the formula, it can be measured, but you cannot measure that everywhere. So they have formulas in order to compute that. And it is used in irrigation requirement analysis very often. I'm going to show example later. This is the type of document related to the reference. So the FAO first, so in the 70s, they released a document which is called crop water requirements, which is providing the way to compute evapotranspiration from the reference evapotranspiration and to adapt this calculation to any type of crop at any moment of the life of the crop. And doing this calculation, you can have information on your irrigation, of the water demand for the crop, and then to have information on how much water you need to apply to the crop. This was updated in the 90s with this book. So it is called the FAO 56 method. It is very famous. We'll talk a little bit after that. So if you work with irrigation, you have this book, I'm sure. And this is the American version, which is using alfalfa instead of grass. The thing is that between this book and this book is almost the same thing, just the reference is different. But most of the main author for this book is also one of the main authors for this book. So this book, the 56 from FAO, is crop evapotranspiration guidelines for computing crop water requirements. It is freely available on internet. And in this system, you have, so the reference evapotranspiration, ET0 or ET0, is calculated with the Penman-Montis equation, which is a very nice equation to compute evapotranspiration because it synthesizes all the parameters or all the factors affecting evapotranspiration. This reference evapotranspiration is computed assuming a short grass canopy with full water availability. And if you go to another crop, you have a crop coefficient which is applied, which permits to compute the evapotranspiration from the reference evapotranspiration by assuming the different level of crop development or different type of crop. And in this book, you have a catalog of crop coefficient value depending on the type of plant. All the methods you need for computing all the input from meteorological data or to compute the meteorological data you don't have. So you don't have temperature, you can compute it in a way or in another. You don't have radiation, you can compute radiation from temperature and so on and so on. And also you have a method to compute the water balance and to adapt the crop coefficient to situation where you are not at the full availability of water. So a schematic information on that is you have the reference crop, you input the information on radiation, temperature, wind speed, and humidity, air humidity, and you can compute the reference evapotranspiration. If you have another crop, you have this coefficient, which is used to multiply or to module the reference evapotranspiration to obtain the evapotranspiration for your crop. The crop coefficient is something looking like that. So here you have the development of the crop, and the crop coefficient is going to increase or to be low when the crop is not developed, to increase to the full development, and after that to decrease with senescence or harvest. So you see is between here, like 0.2 means that evapotranspiration at that time, if there is water, is going to be 20% of the reference evapotranspiration. Here, at the maximum, is going to be 120% of the reference evapotranspiration. The equation which is used for computing evapotranspiration is the Penman-Montis equation. You have it here. I'm not going to detail, but you can see all the parameters entering this equation, which are related to the main factor affecting evapotranspiration. And when you have this formula, which is not a simplified, but the one you're going to use to do the computation, which is derived from the theoretical version of the equation, you have everything to get evapotranspiration in a very fast way. Okay. So that was the introduction. It was a little bit long. But now I'm going to talk about the remote sensing of evapotranspiration. And all the remote sensing methods are based on what I was saying before. These are 4 satellites or 4 systems that were supposed to provide data to compute evapotranspiration. Here you have a Landsat satellite. Here you have a satellite. It is a Terra satellite, which is transporting 2 sensors measuring surface temperature, MODIS, which is well known. Aster, which is maybe not known, it's more experimental. Here you have something which is flying at the moment on the ISS, so the International Space Station. You have here a sensor which was developed in the United States, which is called, the mission is called EcoStress. So it's a new sensor that provides new type of information. And so it is a test. It's going to last for 1 or 2 years, providing new type of images we didn't have before that can help to understand how to measure surface temperature. I'm going to talk after. And after that, to go to evapotranspiration. And here you have something, such a mission called THIRSTY, which is not flying, which is not going to fly later, but which was a project between France and the United States in order to have surface temperature measurement with a fine time resolution and fine spatial resolution in order to follow evapotranspiration. When we try to get evapotranspiration from remote sensing, we have several types of methods available. So one is the aerodynamic residual equation. This is completely related to the energy balance equation I was showing before. It is using the surface temperature and the albedo as the main input. Another one is the evaporative fraction method, which also is related to the energy balance equation. After that, you have here the water balance method and the crop water requirements method, which are based on the water balance equation, not the energy balance equation, and also to use fraction cover information. And this is related to the FAO 56, for example. So the application of the FAO 56 using remote sensing. Here you need, for energy balance, you need to have surface temperature measurement. So only some platform have this type of information. And the only platform at the moment which has a nice spatial resolution, but it is 100 meters, is Landsat. MODIS and Sentinel-3, so MODIS is a sensor, not a platform. The resolution is 1 kilometer. So for agricultural application like irrigation management or whatever, it's not useful. For regional application, it's very useful. For the water balance method and the crop water requirements assessment, Earth observation satellite, standard Earth observation satellite, including Sentinel-2, are useful because the main information coming from satellite is going to be from vegetation indices or the estimation of fraction cover. So the energy balance approach is first. So the equation of energy balance I was showing before. And here, how we use this equation to go to evapotranspiration. So we call the residual method because we compute, so I did a very high maths to go there from the equation before. You have the latent heat flux here, and it's just related to net radiation minus the sensible heat flux and minus the ground heat flux. These three terms can be estimated from remote sensing by having information on vegetation indices and surface temperature and albedo. Albedo is one very important term here where so I don't know if you are familiar with albedo, but albedo is a coefficient expressing the reflection of the solar radiation at the ground surface. So when you have 1 minus albedo, you have the quantity of energy coming from the sun, which is absorbed by the surface, and which is going to be used after that for evapotranspiration. Of course, vegetation indices are going to be derived from spectral reflectances. Albedo also is derived from spectral reflectances. It's not very difficult to get. It's just some kind of sum of the different value of the reflectances from the different bands. The surface temperature is more important. I mean, it's more a problem because it can be obtained just if we have thermal infrared data. So just the three satellites I was talking about before have this in when we talk about Earth observation. Here you have a list of several models that can be used to obtain evapotranspiration based on this principle. And what is important that if you have the remote sensing data, you still need other data and the meteorological data, in particular the solar radiation, but also the wind speed, the air temperature, and so on. And this can be tough to get if you want to have the evapotranspiration on large area. So it can be coming from meteorological network, from atmospheric reanalysis. Atmospheric reanalysis is the use of the atmospheric models that are designed to do weather forecast, and they provide information all over the Earth at 10-kilometer resolution, let's say. So you can have all the meteorological variables with this type of modeling. And it is freely available in many places. And also, some of these variables you can get from remote sensing, in particular solar radiation. I'm going to give an example, which is an old example, but it's giving good information on how this type of model can provide interesting data. So the energy balance equation rewritten in a residual way can be integrated at the daily scale, and you get this type of equation that you have here. So a linear regression between the evapotranspiration and, let's say, the gradient between surface temperature and air temperature. So this is cumulated during the day. This was developed at the time where we didn't have so much computing power and so much images also. And what is important, so there was two coefficients in the equation. So these coefficients, at the beginning, they were obtained by regression on experimental data. Now it's maybe possible to obtain them by regression on simulated data, because we have models that are able to simulate evapotranspiration or the energy balance in a nice way. These coefficients were tabulated for standard type of vegetation, and in particular, the slope is changing with the roughness of the surface, and this can be related to NDVI. The relation is very simple, so it can be integrated in time in a very simple way. And here I'm going to show an example. So it is an integration of surface temperatures derived from NOAA AVHR data. So this sensor was on board of the meteorological satellite. It was still existing, providing data every day, several times a day, at 1 kilometer resolution. And in particular, like just after noon, when the water stress is very, it's possible to sense very well water stress and to have good relation with evapotranspiration. So here we have data which are integrated from March to October in France to look at the drought in France. So the year, they are very far away from you. Maybe some of you were not born. I don't know. Maybe. So 88, 89, and 90. So 88 was very wet, and 89 and 90 were dry. And this study was helping in the analysis of drought extent for the French Ministry for Agriculture. So here you have the south of France and the mean temperature between March and October. And when we say mean, it's just we took I was born, but not doing this. All the available images. So images were coming every day, but someday you have clouds, so they are not included in the average. And you can see, so temperature around 20 degrees in most part of France. Maybe here it's lower, but here you have mountain. Here you have mountain also. And in the south of France, the temperature is higher, like 25, 27, 29 degrees. In 89, a drought developed, And you can see that here in south of France, the mean temperature was increasing a lot as we are switching from, let's say, 27 to 33, 34 degrees in average. So you can see here that the temperature has increased a lot. And also the increase in temperature developed in most of the west part of France. In 90, you have almost the same pattern, but with some regional changes. If we look, so you can see that in this area, the temperature was increasing, while in this area, it was decreasing. And here, in this particular area where I like to be, it was decreasing. This is the north of France. Sorry. So the wet year in 88. Here's the development of drought in 89. And here the development further of drought in 90. So here you have Paris, and which is, I don't know if it's strange, but all over Paris, there are forests, and they were very sensitive to, all around Paris, sorry, they were very sensitive to the drought. So this is a summary of the 3 years. And what is important is to see that the drought here decreased a little bit in 90 compared to 89, while it was increasing in other areas. And now here you have the use of this temperature in order to compute evapotranspiration. So it's not March to October, but it is a whole year. Here you have the average temperature for the whole year. So it's lower than before because you have winter and in the calculation. But what is interesting is to see that in 89 and 90, the temperature increase is very large. And you see that in the central, I don't know how you say that in English. In French, we say Paris Basin. Well, okay, Paris Basin maybe. Okay. Where you see that the temperature increase is large compared to here. And here you have, in this part, you have the calculation of evapotranspiration at the yearly scale. And there is several things interesting on this. That first, if you go in 90, so you see that the evapotranspiration in this area is very low compared to 88. So it decreased from more than 900 to less than 700. But if you look in 89, you see that there is a decrease, but in some part, even if the temperature is increasing, in some part, evapotranspiration is increasing. And actually, this means that when the temperature increases, supposedly we have a relation saying that evapotranspiration is going to decrease, but when we say that, we miss the fact that evapotranspiration first depends on the available energy and solar radiation. And in years where we have drought, it often means that we have less cloud and more radiation. And if we have more radiation, we have a potential to have more evapotranspiration. If water is available, evapotranspiration is increasing. And this is what's happened here. The year after, so we have 1 year of drought, second year of drought, the evapotranspiration was decreasing a lot because the availability of water was really low compared to 89. You have a question for that? So where is Hervé? So you were working on that? Because Hervé was in my lab at the time this study was done, and he was working on that type of information. So just to say how much is old. Okay, this is 2 papers that are interesting to look at because they have, when we talk about the, the residual equations, this is the 2 main systems that are used in the world to get evapotranspiration using this type of equation. One is developed in, or both, or one is developed in the United States, and it is called the Alexis system. It is operational in some part of the world. And the other one is well known by people in agriculture and irrigation, is Sebal, which was developed in the Netherlands, and Metric, which is an adaptation developed in the United States. This is the two main advanced systems using this residual equation that you can find. Now I'm going to talk about another method, which is the evaporative fraction method. So the energy balance equation is replaced by this equation. So the latent heat flux is related to the available energy, net radiation minus grounded flux, through a term which is called evaporative fraction. And the definition of evaporative fraction is very complex math, is this. And this evaporative fraction can be estimated by analyzing a scatterogram between the surface temperature and the albedo, or the surface temperature and a vegetation indices. This is what you have. If you take the albedo image and the surface temperature image, you're going to have a cloud of points here. So this is the best case when everything is very well done. I mean, well, there is no outlier, no problem in the image, you have everything you need to do the technique. And the technique says that at the top of the cloud, you have the highest level of H flux, or the lowest level of evapotranspiration. And usually we say 0. So there is no evapotranspiration on this line. And here you have the maximum value of evapotranspiration. And by looking at an albedo level, looking at the difference between your pixel and so its position between the top and the mean, you get this evaporative fraction. So just by using albedo and surface temperature image, or surface temperature image and NDVI image, you get evaporative fraction. And when you have net radiation, mostly, you can obtain latent heat flux. So there is different type of model doing that. So some of them are using a scatterogram of surface temperature and albedo, or fraction cover, or scatterogram between the gradient of temperature at the surface and some vegetation indices. So there are several methods that were developed. These methods are required meteorological data as the one before, but you need this incoming radiation, but you don't need air temperature and wind speed. And this is very important because air temperature is something you can get from meteorological network or reanalysis, but this air temperature is often not representative of the surface you have below. In particular, the variability of air temperature is large, and it is not accounted in the system where you can obtain the data. So this is a very good advantage not to require this information. But that also a drawback that you don't have the aerodynamic equation, which means that you're not accounting of variation in roughness, and which is related to vegetation height, which means that if you have grass or if you have a forest, it's going to be treated in the same way while it should not. So that have an impact on the accuracy of the derivation of evapotranspiration. This also requires that the meteorological conditions are homogeneous in space, in particular the air temperature. And also that I showed just in the slide before that there is two lines, one wet line and one dry line. You need to be able to get this line. In many situations, it's not possible to get these two lines together. This is an example of what you can obtain. Here you have a surface temperature image. So it was acquired in an experimental session by ESA from a plane. So it's a thermal sensor on a plane. So you have the temperature. So you have the irrigation pivot with a low temperature. there is a full vegetation time. And here you have bare soil, in particular here, with very high temperature. And from the SCB model, which is one of the models using albedo and surface temperature, you get this type of evapotranspiration map. This is another example where I computed the evapotranspiration for different systems in the area close to Avignon. So when you apply this type of system on MODIS data, you can derive information on the long term. So you have here the monthly evapotranspiration, so for 6 years, and different systems. So here you have some swamps. Here you have irrigated grassland where we put a lot of water. So they have, most of the time, they have a lot of water available. Here you have orchards. And here you have a very dry area where there is no water reserve in the soil, so the grass is developing, but it's most of the time dry. And the things which is interesting, in my opinion, in this graph is that if you look at orchard, this orchard, you see the evapotranspiration is decreasing, and at one moment reaching the level of the dry place. Actually, this orchard was cut and destroyed because the farm get bankrupt. And they try to replace the orchard by the original ecosystem, which is a dry steppe. And you see that the system is able to follow the decrease in evapotranspiration after the cut or the change in the surface, in the type of crops or surface. Another example of the SCB model is an application at the scale of the Iberian Peninsula, where you can follow the evapotranspiration. So it's in 1999. You can follow evapotranspiration month by month and see where evapotranspiration is high, depending on the climate. In these three examples, what you can see is that the methodology is exactly the same methodology, can be applied from the very fine resolution, spatial resolution with a plane, because, oh, sorry. So I cut something, okay. In this case, you have, the resolution is like 2 or 3 meters at the ground, while in this case, the resolution is 5 kilometers. So these are some papers related to this model and the work we were doing in relation with the University of Valencia in Spain. So from the plain level to the national level in Spain. And these are other papers really, giving information on the same type of method, so the evaporative fraction method, but using different way of doing this evaporative fraction method, in particular by using vegetation indices instead of albedo, or even for this paper, using only surface temperature, not any other information inside of the calculation. Okay, so I'm going to conclude on the thermal infrared method. What is important at the moment is the problem of satellite in the thermal infrared. So on one side, you have meteorological satellite. I didn't talk about the geostationary satellite like Meteosat or GOES. You have also Polar platform having AVHR sensor, the one which was used for the study of drought in France. So you get data even every 15 minutes or daily with a kilometric resolution or larger. And after that, you have the Earth observation satellite working at the moment, Landsat 8, Landsat 7, but Landsat 7 is really in end of life. Most of the images are bad. You have Sentinel-3, but it is with 1 kilometer resolution. You have some experimental sensor. So I made a mistake, I'm sorry. so Aster, but is at the end of life. Here it's not supposed to be Sentinel-3. So it just, I was going too fast to do this slide. It should be like, I talked about eco-stress on the space station. And here you have some other system like MODIS or SUMI NPP, which is the satellite or the mission which is going to replace the Terra and Aqua satellite where MODIS is installed, that provide 1 kilometer or 700 meter resolution for surface temperature. At the moment, there is no satellite that provide high spatial resolution. So you see high spatial resolution for thermal infrared is 100 meter. So there is no satellite providing this 100 meter with high revisit capacities, which is a large problem if you want to use thermal infrared to have evapotranspiration, and after that, to use this evapotranspiration in operational system. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the water balance and the way we can use the FAO's 56 method with remote sensing. So the water balance equation is completely different because it is the balance of water, not of energy. And so you have evapotranspiration, but in order to get evapotranspiration, you need to know rain. You need to know the variation of storage in the ground. And also you need to know how much water is diverted from the ground to the aquifer or to the rivers. I was talking about the crop coefficient in the introduction. Here you have the crop coefficient, the line above. And here you have the evolution of PVI, which is a vegetation index, which is called the perpendicular vegetation index. It was used a lot in the past because it is insensitive almost to the soil background, to the background, which means that the soil changes color because of moisture. You still have the same value. If you use NDVI, you're going to have a change in the value. And you see that the curves are very similar. And actually, the crop coefficient is closely related to fraction cover. And vegetation indices are closely related to fraction cover. And since this type of constatation, there has been a lot of publication talking about the possibility to get the crop coefficient from remote sensing. So one of the earliest here, 1982. And after that, you get a lot of that. And if you look, so this is Agronomy Journal, but if you look at the name of the journal where this was published, it's always related to agricultural water management or irrigation. And this is, in many places, many type of methods were developed to get this crop coefficient. So, and it's always published in agricultural and water management type of journal. And here, this is a review which was in Sensor, okay, in 2017, where you have a lot of information on this type of modeling. In this paper, you have, for example, a list of equations between vegetation indices and the crop coefficient. So if we come back to the FAO 56 method, so the graph I was showing at the beginning, you compute the crop evapotranspiration from the reference evapotranspiration and the crop coefficient. And this is used to go to the crop water requirements, which means that here, when we have ET node, we are supposed to have a full availability of water. When you manage your crop with irrigation, you try to have also full availability of water. And when you do that, you get something which is a proxy of the real evapotranspiration, but also something which is going to be the quantity of water you need to apply to your crop. here I'm going to show what was done in a project. So it was in the 90s, at the beginning of the century. So I took the slides from a presentation by Han, I don't know how to say that, Shohung or something like that. But, this was a pilot study done in Spain, in the Albacete region, where you have all these pivots for irrigation. So the way to use the FAO 56 method was to do some field work to obtain information on the crop coefficient. And after that, you have a meteorological station, and often it's an agrometeorological station. They are done especially for agricultural work that provide you with the reference evapotranspiration. From that, you can compute the crop water requirement and to distribute this information to the farmers. So at the beginning of the century, in this base, something was working like that. And this type of system is working almost everywhere in the world. The way it is done, when we talk about experimental work, is here you have a lysimeter, which is measuring evapotranspiration. You measure the evapotranspiration, you compare to the reference evapotranspiration, which is computed from the data obtained at this meteorological station. And you can compute, you have an information on the relation between the evapotranspiration, the reference evapotranspiration, and from these two information, you derive the crop coefficient. When you have done this experimental work, you can relate the crop coefficient to the phenology of the crops, and when you have this information, that you know your phenology, you can give the crop coefficient value, you get the reference evapotranspiration from the network, and you compute the evapotranspiration or the water requirement. And this is done, for example, this was done so in the Albacete area. There is an irrigation advisory survey providing for the different type of crop the value of evapotranspiration and then the value of water requirement for the next week. And this was available on, they say, in the press or even on TV, or if you have, you can have the information coming to your fax. I don't know if someone has still a fax in this, but there's still some place they ask you your fax number, but I don't know. So, and it was also the beginning to have this on internet. Okay. In this project, they tried to introduce remote sensing in order to obtain information on the crop coefficient, and with the climate data, using what was provided by the agrometeorological station, they say some information technology here, they can compute the water requirement and to distribute to farmers. Five. Wow. Okay, I'm going to, I have still, I don't know, 100 slides, so I'm going to be fine. It's 5 seconds by slide, okay. So they have remote sensing data, and from this remote sensing data and the model relating NDVI to crop coefficient, they derive curve like that, and they can, okay, I'm going to switch. I had very good animation of everything, but okay. So this is Landsat images, and following the year, you have the information on NDVI, and they okay, I'm going to switch. They translate the NDVI map in crop coefficient map, and after that, using the reference evapotranspiration, they provide evapotranspiration map. And this can be released to the farmers, even now by phone. Even at that time, they were thinking of doing it with a phone, but the phone was not working everywhere in this area, so I don't. So here you know for this field that you need to put 7 millimeters a day to have a good level of irrigation. So this was at the beginning of the century. And now last year they finished a program, so it was a project, where they improved this system. So the improvement, so you have the same graph, but the improvement is in several parts. So this is a new graph, this is the old one, and this is the difference. So instead of talking about crop coefficients, they have something more complex, making a difference between transpiration and evapotranspiration to have a better assessment of the water need. They have a new type of technology for having the information on the web. And also what is very important is that they use meteorological forecast. The meteorological forecast now is very accurate, and when you use the meteorological forecast, you can really say how much water you need in the future, and you're not computing this from what was happening in the last week. And also now they put the data not just to the farmer, but also to technicians, because the farmer is not always simple for them to interpret or to use this data. Most of the time they don't have the time. And also they use Sentinel-2. And this is one example of the platform they have, where you can see the level of water you need to put on the different places, I mean, at the pixel level for the next week. Okay, water balance. So I'm going to switch to another case. Okay, this FAO56 method was for the water requirement. And this was done in the situation you don't have, the water availability is high. Now in situation where you don't have irrigation, for example, in the Mediterranean, you need to account for the fact that there will be water stress. So transpiration is going to decrease after when the available water content is decreasing. The soil evaporation also is going to decrease, so I don't give details here, and the crop coefficient is going to be computed by doing the difference between the part related to evaporation, the part related to transpiration, including the impact of lack of water. And also something different from before, that you can use F-cover. I suppose that Marie Weiss, the day before, she was explaining you how to get fraction cover from remote sensing data. And when you have this fraction cover and some information on the maximum value for the crop coefficient, you can use a FAO model using the Copernicus product, for example. So Copernicus product is something which is freely available, which gives you fraction cover at 300 meter, 1 kilometer resolution. 1 kilometer resolution starts in 99. And from that, you can compute evapotranspiration. So here I'm working on forest. And in gray, you have the reference evapotranspiration. Don't look at the blue. And the red is a calculation of evapotranspiration with the model. Here, in summer, you can see that there is a very high water stress. If you consider a definition of calculation of water stress, or an NDIS, which is a ratio between the real evapotranspiration and the potential, or the reference evapotranspiration, you see that here the stress is very high. This is a comparison of the simulation to the measurement of evapotranspiration, showing that we are able to capture the evolution and the stress. I don't know. Yeah, something important here that you can feed this type of model with different information, different sources of information. Here you have fraction cover coming from different sensors, so it's different. Here you have the rain coming from different meteorological reanalysis, and it can be very different. For example, in this case, there is more than 250% difference. Here you have the reference evapotranspiration coming from two different meteorological reanalyses. It's close. And now you put that in the model and you get all the different lines here are the different estimation of evapotranspiration. And the black line is a kind of average of all this estimation. But you see that we can follow evapotranspiration most of the time if you compare to the red line, which are the measurements. Okay. Okay, I'm going to the end, I suppose. So, some conclusion on the water balance model, that you need vegetation indices or fraction cover estimate that you can obtain from reflectances. So you can have a lot of image to do that, in particular with Sentinel-2. It is free. But the main difficulty with this method, if you go to a situation where you don't have irrigation or you don't have, the water is not at the full availability, is that you require information on the soil properties. And this is very difficult to get in space. So the information, for example, is maximum available water content, and actually we don't know this because it's even changing with the type of plant. So it's very difficult to use because of that. But it is very well, this method is very well adapted to crop water requirement assessment and irrigation management. And the last slide, I think. Okay, a summary for the two types of method I was talking about. Thermal infrared and energy balance approaches. You get direct information on evapotranspiration. So direct is, you have seen all the equation, so it's not really direct, but the thing is that you don't need information on the soil properties, which are difficult to know, and you don't need information on plant processes, in particular stomatal conductance or crop coefficient. But at the moment, there is no mission or no flying mission with an adequate frequency for high-resolution monitoring. And you need to do interpolation between images, and this is a large loss in accuracy of the methodology. So there are new projects of new thermal missions, in particular at ESA, maybe a new Sentinel in the future, or also at CNES in relation with the Indian Space Agency, which is called Trishna, where we try to have a satellite passing every 2 or 3 days with 50-meter resolution. The water balance approach is very well adapted to crop water requirement and irrigation management, but it requires information on soil property if you want to go further. And I think that's all.
Thank you very much, Oli. Thank you. Thank you very much, Albert, for this overview about evapotranspiration. You may not know why it was so important that you have evapotranspiration during your week. You know this is a big, big missing piece in agriculture from a remote sensing perspective. Even ESA knows that, because Sentinel-10, the Sentinel-10, this is still under decision for the Copernicus mission, but it should be a mission which will target the evapotranspiration as the only product at 50-meter resolution. We hope to get it in 2022, 2024, but still the member state has to decide. But because we all know that evapotranspiration is really the key piece missing today. If there is any question for Albert, we can have 1 or 2 quick questions. No more question. You are completely dead.
No, but there is one question: is when are we going to eat?
It's not only you. There is a question over there.
About the soil properties, you said very important. So, what is your approach? Meaning, in your area, you have good land data on soil properties. What is your approach to this issue?
Okay. If you are working on crops, you can have soil properties, because if there is people doing that type of job, means that there is enough insight in the area, and that there will be soil properties. And also knowing that for corn or for wheat is not going to be the same water availability and so on. So in this case, you can do it. But if you go to the global something more global, including natural land and so on. You don't know the soil properties, and there is almost no way to know them. There is, at the moment, people tried with remote sensing to obtain soil property, but it's still something which is not working well. So the approach at the moment is to make a relation between the amount of vegetation and soil properties, for example, and after that to apply. And one thing I didn't say in the talk is that anyway, evapotranspiration estimation is very difficult to validate. So usually we don't know if we are right.
Hey. Hello. A quick question. Can I ask you the difference between crop reference evapotranspiration and potential evapotranspiration?
Okay. The reference evapotranspiration is just one of the potential evapotranspiration. Potential evapotranspiration has no real has no real definition. There are several definitions, and there are also several ways of computing it, and you don't get the same result. So it's just something at the moment people didn't have computer to compute evapotranspiration. They were trying to have something to have an estimation, and everyone was developing its own version. So the reference one is one of them, but it is specifically designed for plants. And also, when you take the FAO1, the FAO reference evapotranspiration, is completely spread in the world now. So almost everyone can use the same one.
Thank you very much, Albert, for those clarifications.